A rich man gave a jacket to an elderly woman in the cold next day he saw her crying in front of. The sun cast long shadows over the weathered headstone as an elderly woman knelt before it, her trembling hands clutching a familiar black leather jacket. Tears streamed down her wrinkled face as she traced the engraved name Emily Sawyer, 1940 to 1980. From her worn handbag, she pulled out a faded photograph, a young couple embracing beside a sun-dappled farmhouse, their faces radiating joy and promise. The woman pressed the photo to her chest, whispering, "I'm so sorry, Emily. I never meant for any of this to happen." Behind her, unnoticed, a tall figure watched from the shadows, recognizing his own jacket draped across her frail shoulders. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The clock struck 10 at the towering Sawyer Industries building, where Ethan Sawyer stood at his office window, his reflection ghosting against the cityscape below. At 45, he'd achieved everything his father had demanded: Harvard Business School, CEO position, the corner office that Richard Sawyer once occupied. Yet the emptiness in his chest grew deeper with each passing year. His secretary had long since left, leaving him alone with the familiar silence. The same silence that filled his penthouse apartment, broken only by the occasional clink of ice in his nightly scotch. People called him brilliant, ruthless, unreachable, the same words they'd once used for his father. The thought made him wince. Across town, in a modest law office, his sister Lauren Sawyer was still working, buried in case files. At 42, she'd built her reputation defending domestic abuse victims, though few knew the painful irony behind her chosen specialty. Her dark hair was pulled back severely, her tailored suit a armor against memories she'd rather forget. Their paths rarely crossed these days, save for the obligatory board meetings where they maintained the facade of family unity. Neither spoke of their mother anymore, or the summer of 1974 that changed everything. The official story, a tragic car accident, had been repeated so often it almost felt true. Almost. But before she was Emily Sawyer, tragic wife of business mogul Richard Sawyer, she was Emily Matthews, a vibrant young woman with dreams bigger than her small-town origins. The photographs Ethan kept hidden in his desk drawer showed a different mother than the one he remembered, laughing in a sundress by an old farmhouse, her arms around a dark-haired man who wasn't Richard Sawyer. Henry Salazar had been the son of migrant farm workers, working his way through college when he met Emily at the local diner where she waitressed. Their love story should have been simple, the kind of sweet summer romance that fades into fond memory. Instead, it became the tragedy that would haunt three families for generations. Richard Sawyer had first seen Emily at a charity function where she was serving drinks. Within weeks, he'd arranged to have her hired at his company, showering her with attention and expensive gifts. He was 35, she was 22. When she tried to decline his advances, mentioning her relationship with Henry, Richard's obsession only grew stronger. The photographs in his private safe told that story: Emily and Henry meeting secretly in the park, at the old farmhouse, outside the library. Each image meticulously dated, each moment of their happiness documented by the private investigators Richard had hired. His surveillance was complete, his patience calculating. Mildred Garcia had been Emily's best friend since childhood, the only one who knew the whole truth. Now, at 75, she lived with her granddaughter Patricia in a small house on the outskirts of town, surviving on the monthly checks that still arrived from the Sawyer Family Trust. The guilt had bent her spine more than age, though few knew the weight she carried. That summer of 1974 hung like a shadow over them all. Emily, newly married to Richard, discovered she was pregnant. The timing left no doubt about the father, though Richard refused to acknowledge the possibility. Henry had already been driven from town by then, his reputation destroyed by false accusations of embezzlement and fraud. The old farmhouse still stood, though its paint had long since faded. It was there that Emily and Henry had first met, there that they'd planned their escape, and there that everything had fallen apart. The local teenagers called it haunted now, spreading stories about the cries they sometimes heard on wind-swept nights. Lauren kept her own collection of memories in a locked drawer, her mother's diary, found years after the accident, its pages filled with desperate plans and fading hope. The last entry, dated just days before her death, hinted at a final attempt at freedom. I can't let him win. I won't let my children grow up thinking this is what love looks like. Richard Sawyer had built his empire on control of his business, his family, his legacy. The newspapers praised his philanthropy, his business acumen, his dedication to family values. Only those closest to him saw the obsession that drove him, the possessiveness that turned to rage at the slightest hint of defiance. The official police report listed the cause of death as driver lost control of vehicle. The unofficial report, sealed by judge's order, contained witness statements about a black sedan that had pursued Emily's car that rainy night. Roberto Garcia, Mildred's son and Emily's would-be savior, was also lost in the crash. His body was never found. Now, decades later, the truth remained buried beneath layers of silence and shame. Ethan and Lauren had built their separate lives, successful by any measure, yet haunted by questions they never dared to ask. Their father's recent death had loosened some of those bonds of silence, but the full story remained untold. The wealthy New England society that had embraced the Sawyer family's rise to prominence still whispered about Emily's death at parties, though never within earshot of her children. They remembered her as beautiful, tragic, perhaps a bit unstable. None knew about the bruises she'd hidden beneath designer dresses or the secret bank account she'd been building for her escape. Each character carried their own piece of the puzzle: Ethan's unspoken guilt over the times he'd sided with his father, Lauren's nightmares about the sounds she'd heard the night of the crash, Mildred's desperate choice between friendship and her son's safety. And Henry, wherever he was, with the knowledge of what really happened that summer when love dared to challenge power. The stage was set for secrets to unravel, for truth to emerge from shadow, and for a family's carefully constructed facade to finally crumble under the weight of long-buried truths. All it would take was a single act of kindness, a jacket offered to a shivering old woman on a cold night, to set the wheels of revelation in motion. The evening Ethan encountered Mildred in the park began like any other, with him working late in his office, surrounded by the familiar cocoon of solitude. As he left the building, something made him take the path through the small park, a deviation from his usual routine that would change everything. There, hunched on a bench beneath flickering streetlights, sat an elderly woman, shivering in clothes too thin for the autumn chill. Something about her vulnerability pierced his carefully constructed walls. Without thinking, he removed his expensive leather jacket and draped it over her trembling shoulders. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said, his voice gentler than he'd used in years. When she looked up, her eyes held such profound sadness that it stopped him cold. "Sometimes alone is all we have left," she whispered, clutching the jacket closer. "Sometimes it's what we deserve." He should have walked away then. Later he would wonder how different things might have been if he had. Instead, he found himself sitting beside her, watching as she pulled something from her worn purse, a photograph, its edges softened by years of handling. Is that he began recognition dawning as he stared at the young woman in the image. "That's my mother." Mildred's hands began to shake violently. She tried to hide the photo, but Ethan had already seen it, his mother, young and laughing, standing in front of an old farmhouse with a dark-haired man he didn't recognize. "Who is he?" Ethan demanded, his voice sharper now. "Why do you have this?" But Mildred was already struggling to her feet, attempting to return his jacket. "I shouldn't be here," she mumbled. "I've already caused enough damage." The next morning, driven by a compulsion he couldn't explain, Ethan visited his mother's grave for the first time in years. The sight that greeted him stopped his heart. There was Mildred, kneeling before the headstone, still wearing his jacket and weeping as though her heart would break. "I saw him yesterday, Emily," she was saying, "unaware of his presence. Your boy. He has your kindness, the same kindness that got you killed." Ethan's phone buzzed, Lauren calling. He almost ignored it, but something made him answer. "You need to come to my office," his sister said without preamble. "I found something in Dad's old files." Lauren's office was a stark contrast to his own, filled with case files and legal books rather than financial reports. She looked up as he entered, her face pale. "Look at this," she said, pushing a folder across her desk. Inside were more photographs, surveillance photos spanning years. Their mother with the same dark-haired man from Mildred's photo, meeting in secret, exchanging letters, sharing stolen moments. "There's more," Lauren said quietly, pulling out a diary. "It was Mom's. I found it hidden in Dad's study after the funeral. Ethan, she was planning to leave him." The diary entries told a story so different from the one they'd grown up believing. Their mother hadn't been the fragile, unstable woman their father had described. She had been fighting for her freedom, planning an escape with the help of someone named Roberto. Roberto Garcia, Lauren read from the final entry. He was supposed to help her get away that night. He died in the crash with her, but they never found his body. Garcia, Ethan repeated, remembering the elderly woman in the park. Mildred Garcia. Lauren's head snapped up. "How do you know that name?" As Ethan described his encounters with Mildred, Lauren's face grew increasingly troubled. "This isn't coincidence," she said finally. "She's been visiting Mom's grave for years. The groundskeeper told me, but I never knew why." They sat in silence, absorbing the implications. Their father, the man they'd idolized, had been conducting surveillance on their mother. She had been planning to escape, and somehow Mildred Garcia was at the center of it all. "We need to talk to her," Lauren decided, already reaching for her coat. "Really talk to her. She knows what happened that night." But when they arrived at the cemetery, Mildred was gone. Only Ethan's jacket remained, carefully folded and placed at the base of the headstone, along with a note, "I'm sorry, Emily. The truth cost too much." The groundskeeper approached them, holding something else, a stack of water-damaged letters he'd found hidden behind a loose stone in the headstone. "She's been leaving these for years," he explained. "Always on the anniversary of your mother's death." As they read through the letters, a story began to emerge, one of friendship, betrayal, and impossible choices. Mildred's words painted a picture of a young Emily Matthews, full of dreams and determination, and her love for Henry Salazar, the man their father had systematically destroyed. "We have to find her," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. "We have to know the whole truth." Lauren nodded, but her expression was troubled. "Be careful what you wish for," she warned. "Some truths change everything." They couldn't know then how right she was, or how their search for answers would unravel not just their family's past, but their understanding of who they were and everything they thought they knew about love, loyalty, and the price of silence. The first breakthrough came in an unexpected place, a small, safe deposit box in their father's private bank. Among the documents and photographs, they found a birth certificate that shattered everything they thought they knew. Sarah Elizabeth Salazar, born June 15, 1974, just months before their mother's death. Mother Emily Sawyer. Father Henry Salazar. "We have a sister," Lauren whispered, her hands trembling as she held the document. "Dad must have known. This is why." Ethan couldn't finish her thought. The implications were staggering. A child hidden away all these years, proof of their mother's love for Henry and their father's ultimate betrayal. The bank manager provided another piece of the puzzle, a trust fund, set up in Sarah's name, with regular payments made through a law firm in Arizona. Their sister was alive, and their father had been keeping tabs on her all along. Back in Lauren's office, they found more evidence in Richard's surveillance files. Photos of a dark-haired girl growing up from afar, school graduations, college ceremonies, even her wedding. Their father had monitored every moment of her life without ever making contact. "Look at her," Lauren said softly, touching a recent photo. "She has Mom's smile." Before they could digest this revelation, Mildred Garcia appeared at Lauren's office door, looking more fragile than ever. "I saw you at the bank," she said quietly. "I knew this day would come." She sat heavily in a chair, her aged hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Your mother made me promise to protect Sarah if anything happened to her. It was the last thing she asked of me before her voice broke." Before what Ethan demanded, but Lauren laid a restraining hand on his arm. "I helped arrange the adoption," Mildred continued, "through my cousin in Arizona. Emily knew. She knew Richard would never accept Henry's child. She was trying to protect both her babies." The story spilled out Emily had discovered her pregnancy shortly after being forced to marry Richard. Henry had already been driven from town by Richard's false accusations, but Mildred had maintained contact. The plan had been for Emily to hide the pregnancy, give birth in secret, and then escape with both children once Sarah was born. But Richard found out, Mildred whispered. Not about Sarah, he never knew about her. But he discovered Emily was planning to leave. He had people watching her every move. Lauren pulled out their mother's diary. "These entries," she said, "about Roberto helping her escape. Was that part of the plan too?" Mildred's face crumpled. "Roberto was my son. He loved Emily like a sister. When Richard threatened to destroy my family if I didn't tell him about Emily's plans, I made the wrong choice. I thought I was protecting my son, but in the end..." "You betrayed her," Ethan said coldly. "Yes," Mildred admitted, tears streaming down her face. "But Roberto couldn't live with what I'd done. He decided to help Emily anyway. The night of the accident..." A knock at the office door interrupted her. A young woman stood there, her dark hair and familiar eyes stopping them all cold. "I'm Patricia Garcia," she said, "Mildred's granddaughter. And I think it's time you knew the whole truth about Roberto." Patricia placed an old cassette tape on Lauren's desk. "My father didn't die in the crash with your mother," she said quietly. "He survived, but what he saw that night, Richard Sawyer made sure he'd never tell anyone." The tape contained Roberto's voice, recorded years later, detailed descriptions of Richard Sawyer's car running Emily's vehicle off the road, of Roberto being threatened into silence, of a lifetime spent in hiding to protect his own daughter. "Dad died last year," Patricia said, "but he wanted the truth to come out. That's why grandmother's been leaving those letters at the grave. She's been trying to find the courage to tell you everything." The pieces were falling into place, but they still didn't have the full picture. What had happened to Henry? Where was Sarah now? And most importantly, why had Richard Sawyer gone to such lengths to keep his secrets? Lauren found another clue in their father's personal papers, a letter from Henry Salazar, dated just weeks before Richard's death. "I know what you did to her," it read, "and soon everyone else will too." Henry's alive, Ethan realized. He's been waiting all this time. But where, Lauren wondered, spreading out the documents before them. Mildred touched the old photograph of the farmhouse. "Where it all began," she said softly. "Where love first bloomed, and where it was destroyed." Emily always said their story would end where it started. The farmhouse. The answer had been there all along, waiting in the place where their mother had first fallen in love, where she had dreamed of a different life, and where, perhaps, the final pieces of truth still waited to be uncovered. As they prepared to confront the past one final time, none of them could have predicted the shocking revelations that awaited them or the price they would all pay for uncovering the truth about Emily Sawyer's last night alive. The search for Henry Salazar led them through a trail of carefully hidden breadcrumbs. Each discovery revealed more of Richard's calculated manipulation and the true fate of Roberto Garcia, painting a picture darker than they'd imagined. Ethan and Lauren began at the local library's archives, scanning decades-old newspapers. Headlines told the story of Henry's fall from grace. Local businessman accused of embezzlement. Salazar faces multiple fraud charges. Prominent families' trust betrayed. All orchestrated by Richard Sawyer. Look at the dates, Lauren pointed out, spreading the articles across the table. Each accusation came right after Mom tried to contact Henry. Dad was watching everything. They found Henry's old office address, now a vacant building on the edge of town. The landlord, an elderly man who remembered those days, shared what he knew. Salazar was a good man, built his business from nothing. Then one day everything changed. Bank accounts frozen, clients disappeared, reputation ruined. Never saw anything like it. Deeper investigation revealed Richard's methodical destruction of Henry's life. Bank records showed mysterious withdrawals, forged documents, and fabricated evidence of theft. Richard had used his connections to ensure Henry lost everything: his business, his reputation, and ultimately Emily. But where did he go? Ethan wondered, staring at the last known photograph of Henry leaving town. The answer came from an unexpected source: Patricia Garcia's own investigation into her father's disappearance. She'd found Roberto's hidden journals, revealing a complex web of surveillance and threats. "My father didn't just die in that crash," Patricia explained, her voice tight with controlled anger. "He survived, and what he saw that night made him Richard Sawyer's prisoner for the rest of his life." Roberto's journal entries painted a chilling picture. After surviving the crash, he'd witnessed Richard's true nature, watched him check Emily's pulse, saw his face when he realized she was gone. No grief, just satisfaction. "He saw me then, made me an offer: disappear forever, or my family would suffer accidents like Emily's." The journal detailed Roberto's years in hiding, moving from city to city, always under Richard's watch. Monthly payments ensured his silence, but guilt ate at his soul. His final entry, dated just before his death, read: "Henry is alive. He's where Emily always said they'd meet again. The place where promises were made." Lauren's research uncovered more of Richard's manipulation. Bank statements showed regular payments to private investigators, hidden accounts for bribes, and a network of people paid to maintain his lies. He didn't just destroy Henry, Lauren realized. He created an entire alternate reality to control everyone around him. They found evidence of Richard's obsession in his private study: hundreds of surveillance photos of Emily, recordings of her phone calls, copies of her letters to Henry that never reached their destination. The extent of his control was staggering. A deposit box key led them to more revelations: documents proving Richard had falsified the evidence against Henry, orchestrated the accidents that befell anyone who tried to help Emily, and maintained a network of informants to track Henry's movements over the years. But why keep tracking him? Ethan wondered. Why not just let him disappear? The answer lay in Roberto's final confession, found among Patricia's father's belongings. Richard knew Emily was pregnant when she died, knew it wasn't his child. His biggest fear was Henry coming back for the baby, the living proof of Emily's love for another man. This revelation shed new light on Richard's decades-long surveillance. He hadn't just been protecting his reputation, he'd been hiding the existence of Sarah, Emily, and Henry's daughter. Patricia shared her father's last words: Henry never stopped looking for his child. Richard's people were always one step behind him, moving Sarah's adoptive family whenever Henry got too close. That's what the payments were for keeping Henry away from his daughter. The truth about Roberto's disappearance emerged through a series of letters he'd written to Mildred but never sent. He described years of forced silence, watching from afar as his mother carried the guilt of Emily's death. Richard had used Roberto's survival to ensure Mildred's continued cooperation, threatening to expose her role in Emily's death if she ever revealed the truth. "Your mother knew," Patricia told them softly. "In those final days she discovered Roberto was alive. That's why she made her last desperate attempt to escape. She wanted to expose everything." The pieces were falling into place, revealing a tapestry of manipulation that spanned decades. Richard hadn't just killed Emily, he'd orchestrated an elaborate web of lies and threats to keep his perfect family image intact. But the biggest revelation came from an unexpected source, a deathbed confession from one of Richard's former private investigators. He revealed that Henry had been sending messages through the years, hidden in plain sight donations to charities Emily had loved, flowers sent to her grave on significant dates, and most importantly, regular visits to the old farmhouse where their love story began. He's been waiting, Lauren realized. All these years he's been waiting for someone to uncover the truth. As they prepared to visit the farmhouse, they knew they were close to finding Henry and with him the final pieces of their mother's story. But they couldn't know that what awaited them would challenge everything they thought they understood about love, loyalty, and the price of truth. The story of Emily and Henry's romance emerged through a collection of letters found in Mildred's attic, preserved in an old hatbox tied with faded ribbon. Each letter painted a picture of a love that defied the social boundaries of 1970s New England. "My dearest Henry," one letter began, dated summer 1973. "Today at the diner, when you slipped that poetry book into my apron pocket, I felt my heart soar. Your marginalia made me laugh. Who else would dare to correct Robert Frost? This is why I love you. You see the world differently, challenge everything, make me brave." Their romance had blossomed at the old farmhouse, where Henry worked summers while attending college. Emily would bring him lunch, and they'd sit among the apple trees, dreaming of their future. She'd read her poetry, he'd share his plans for building his own business. "We were there the day they met," Mildred shared, her voice thick with memory. Emily was delivering pies for her mother's bakery. Henry was fixing the barn roof. He called down asking if she'd share her delivery, said he'd never tasted anything sweeter than her smile. More letters revealed their secret meetings, midnight swims in the farm pond, sunrise picnics in hidden meadows, stolen moments in the town library where Henry studied. Their love grew stronger as Richard Sawyer's interest in Emily became more aggressive. "I won't let him buy my future," Emily wrote to Henry. "He thinks everything has a price, but not this, not us. We'll build our own dream, even if we have to start with nothing." Mildred's face crumpled as she recalled her impossible choice. "Richard came to me on a Tuesday," she whispered, "showed me photos of Roberto leaving a known drug dealer's house, said he could have my son arrested, convicted, imprisoned. All I had to do was tell him Emily's plans." The evidence against Roberto had been fabricated, but Mildred didn't know that then. She only saw her teenage son's future hanging by a thread. "I thought I could warn Emily somehow, find another way. But Richard watched everything. He made me call him the moment Emily told me about the pregnancy." Lauren found her mother's diary entry from that day. "Mildred was strange today. Her hands shook when I told her about the baby. My best friend, who shared every secret since childhood, couldn't meet my eyes. Something's wrong, but I can't ask. Henry says we have to be careful now, trust no one." The weight of betrayal had reshaped all their lives. Mildred chose her son, only to lose him anyway. Emily trusted her heart, and it led to tragedy. Henry fought for love and watched everything crumble. "The night I told Richard," Mildred continued, "I heard him make a phone call. He said destroy everything. Bank records, business contracts, reputation. By morning I want Henry Salazar to be toxic in this town." I realized then what I'd done, but it was too late. As these revelations emerged, the family alliances began to shift. Ethan and Lauren, who'd spent years avoiding each other, found themselves united in their quest for truth. Patricia, initially suspicious of the Sawyer siblings, became their strongest ally, sharing Roberto's hidden records. Even the town's old guard began choosing sides. Richard's former business partners, sensing change coming, started reaching out. Some offered evidence of his manipulations, others tried to cover their complicity. "Your father kept files on everyone," his former secretary admitted, providing access to a hidden safe. "Anyone who knew about Emily and Henry, anyone who might help them, he made sure they all had something to lose." The most significant shift came when Mildred finally agreed to testify about Richard's involvement in Emily's death. "I'm tired of carrying this weight," she declared. "Emily deserved better from me. It's time her children knew everything." The public story of the Sawyer family, wealthy, powerful, untouchable, began to crumble. Those who had witnessed Richard's cruelty started speaking out. Former employees shared stories of his obsessive surveillance. Old friends remembered Emily's fading spirit. "We were all complicit," the family lawyer admitted. "We saw what was happening to Emily, but Richard's power seemed absolute. Who would believe us against him?" As they prepared to confront the final truths waiting at the farmhouse, the alliances were clear. No longer were they separate people trapped in Richard's web of lies. They had become a united front, determined to uncover the full story of Emily and Henry's love, and the price they all paid for silence. "Whatever we find there," Lauren told Ethan, gripping his hand, "we face it together. For Mum. For Henry. For the truth." None of them could have predicted the shocking revelations that awaited them at the old farmhouse, secrets that would test their newfound unity and force them to question everything they thought they knew about love, loyalty, and redemption. The old farmhouse loomed before them in the fading autumn light, its weathered walls holding decades of secrets. Ethan, Lauren, Mildred, and Patricia stood at the overgrown entrance, the weight of imminent truth heavy in the air. "He's here," Mildred whispered, clutching her shawl. "Henry always said he'd return to where it began." They approached the creaking porch steps, years of neglect evident in every splintered board. Through the dusty windows, a faint light flickered. Someone was inside. Lauren's hand trembled as she reached for the door handle. The interior was sparse but showed signs of recent habitation: a worn armchair, stacks of newspapers, and on the mantel, dozens of photographs of Emily through the years. But what stopped them cold was the sight of not one, but two elderly men rising from chairs by the fireplace. "Welcome," one said softly, his voice carrying years of pain. "I've been waiting for this moment for so long." Henry Salazar's face was weathered, but his eyes held the same intensity seen in the old photographs with Emily. The second man stepped forward, and Mildred gasped, "Roberto." But it wasn't Roberto Garcia who stood before them. The man's face bore an uncanny resemblance to Henry's: same dark eyes, same strong jawline, aged by time but unmistakable. "Thomas Salazar," he introduced himself, "Henry's twin brother. And one of the witnesses to what really happened the night your mother died." The revelations began to cascade, each more shocking than the last. Thomas had been working with Henry for decades, helping him stay hidden while gathering evidence against Richard. They'd maintained separate lives, trading places when Richard's investigators got too close. "Your father's surveillance wasn't as perfect as he thought," Thomas explained. "While he watched me, thinking I was Henry, my brother was free to search for Sarah." Henry moved to a trunk in the corner, pulling out stacks of documents. Every piece of evidence Richard tried to destroy, every lie he told, every person he threatened, we documented it all. But we needed one thing to make it complete. "A witness," Lauren breathed, understanding dawning. "Yes," Henry nodded. "Someone who saw what really happened that night. Someone who could testify to Richard's actions without fear of retribution." Mildred stepped forward, her face ashen. "Roberto. You found him?" "Better," Thomas said, moving to the farmhouse door. "We protected him." The door opened again, and a figure stepped into the firelight. Roberto Garcia, aged but very much alive, stood before them. Mildred's knees buckled, and Patricia rushed to support her grandmother. "Hello, Mama," Roberto said softly. "I'm sorry for letting you think I was dead. It was the only way to keep everyone safe." The story poured out. Roberto had survived the crash that killed Emily, witnessed Richard's actions, and fled that night not because of Richard's threats, but as part of a plan he'd already made with Henry. "Emily knew Richard would never stop," Roberto explained. "She made me promise that if anything happened to her, I'd help Henry protect Sarah. My death made it possible. Henry produced a leather portfolio. Roberto documented everything that night: Richard running Emily's car off the road, checking to make sure she was dead, making the call to cover it up. We've been building the case ever since. But why wait so long? Ethan demanded, anger and grief warring in his voice. Because of Sarah, Henry said quietly. Richard kept her adoptive family under constant surveillance. One wrong move, and they'd disappear again. We had to wait until he couldn't hurt her anymore. Lauren sank into a chair, overwhelmed. All these years, you were protecting our sister. Your mother's last words, Henry's voice broke. She made me promise to keep Sarah safe, no matter the cost. She knew Richard would never stop hunting for her, the living proof of our love. Thomas pulled out more files. We weren't just gathering evidence against Richard. We were documenting every person he'd threatened, every life he'd destroyed. The network of fear he built wasn't just about Emily, it was about maintaining his power through generations. Roberto stepped forward, placing a hand on Mildred's shoulder. Mom, Richard didn't just threaten me that night. He threatened Patricia before she was even born. He said he'd make sure my child would pay for any mistake you made. Mildred's cry of anguish echoed through the old house. My God, what did I do? Emily, I chose wrong. I chose so wrong. No, Mama, Roberto said firmly, you chose like a mother. Emily understood that. It's why she made sure I survived, to show you someday that love is stronger than fear. A noise from upstairs made them all freeze. Henry smiled sadly. There's one more person you need to meet, he said. Someone who's been waiting as long as I have for this moment. Footsteps sounded on the old stairs, and a woman in her late 40s appeared. Her dark hair held streaks of grey, but her eyes, Emily's eyes, were bright with tears. Hello, she said softly. I'm Sarah. And I think it's time we all knew the whole truth about our mother. The revelations weren't over. They were just beginning. The next wave of revelations came from Sarah, who carried a worn leather case filled with evidence of Richard's true nature, evidence Emily had carefully collected during her final months. Mom knew she was living on borrowed time, Sarah explained, spreading letters and documents across the old farmhouse table. She documented everything: Richard's threats, his surveillance, the way he orchestrated Henry's destruction. But most importantly, she documented this. She produced a medical file dated weeks before Emily's death. I wasn't just an unexpected pregnancy. I was Mom's proof that Richard was lying about everything. The medical records revealed a truth Richard had desperately tried to hide: he was infertile. Every child he'd claimed as his own, including Ethan and Lauren, had been conceived through fertility treatments. But Emily's pregnancy with Sarah was natural, and it would have exposed his carefully constructed lies. Your father's obsession wasn't just about control, Henry explained, his voice heavy. It was about legacy. He couldn't bear the thought that his perfect family line would continue through another man's child, especially a man he considered beneath him. Sarah pulled out more documents: Richard's private medical records, correspondence with fertility clinics, and most damning, letters threatening doctors who knew the truth. He built his entire identity on the lie of genetic superiority, Thomas added. The great Sawyer bloodline, but it was all false. When Emily's pregnancy threatened to expose that. He killed her, Lauren finished, her voice breaking. To protect his lie. Roberto stepped forward with a recording device. I captured this the night of the accident. Richard's own words, his confession. He pressed play, and Richard Sawyer's voice filled the room, cold and calculating. You really thought you could escape, Emily? That I'd let Henry's bastard destroy everything I built? No one will ever know. Your accident will be tragic, but accidents happen, and your precious Henry will spend his life knowing he caused your death. Ethan gripped the table, knuckles white. How many lives did he destroy to protect this secret? The evidence was staggering. Over decades, Richard had created an intricate web of lies, bribes, and threats. Anyone who discovered the truth about his infertility mysteriously lost their medical license, faced false criminal charges, or worse. The Sawyer family legacy was his obsession, Henry explained. He couldn't bear the thought that his empire would be built on a lie, that his own children, the proof of his superior breeding, weren't biologically his. Sarah's voice softened. Mom tried to use this knowledge to free herself. She threatened to expose him. That's when his surveillance became absolute. He couldn't risk her reaching Henry, telling him about me. Lauren suddenly understood. That's why he was so brutal with us after her death. Why he made us believe she was unstable, unfaithful. He was ensuring we'd never question the story he created. The family legacy they'd thought they were protecting all these years had been built on foundations of lies and violence. The Sawyer name, once synonymous with power and prestige, was a careful fabrication. But now, Sarah said, standing tall, we have a choice. We can continue hiding behind these lies, or we can create a new legacy, one built on truth, no matter how painful. Mildred spoke up, her voice stronger than before. Emily would want the truth, all of it, no matter the cost. The cost will be enormous, Thomas warned. When this becomes public, the Sawyer empire will likely crumble. Everything built on Richard's lies will be questioned. Good, Ethan said firmly. It's time to tear it all down. Build something honest from the ruins. They spent hours reviewing the evidence, planning their next steps. The Sawyer legacy was at stake, but not in the way Richard had always feared. Instead of protecting a lie, they would honor the truth about Emily's courage, Henry's love, and the real meaning of family. We're not just Sawyers, Lauren realized, looking around at their unlikely gathering. We're the children of Emily Matthews, who loved deeply enough to die protecting us. That's the legacy we need to preserve. As night fell over the old farmhouse, they made their decision. The truth would come out, all of it. The cost would be devastating, fortunes lost, reputations destroyed, comfortable lies exposed. But they would face it together, bound not by blood but by something stronger, the truth they'd fought so hard to uncover. Sarah picked up a photo of their mother, young and smiling at the farmhouse. Mom wrote something on the back of this just before she died. I think it's time we all heard it. She turned the photograph over, reading Emily's final message: love doesn't die with secrets. It waits in the truth, patient as stars, until brave hearts find their way home. They had found their way home. Now they had to be brave enough to face what came next. The true story of the accident emerged like a nightmare brought into daylight, each detail more horrific than the last. Roberto's testimony, preserved on an old tape recorder he'd kept hidden for decades, painted the scene in devastating clarity. It was raining that night. His recorded voice trembled. Emily called, saying she had proof of Richard's lies, medical records showing he couldn't father children. She was finally ready to expose everything. I promised to drive her to Henry. The tape crackled with the weight of memory. We were halfway to the farmhouse when I saw the headlights in the rearview mirror. Richard's black sedan, gaining speed. Emily clutched her bag of evidence, whispering, he knows. Dear God, he knows. In the farmhouse's dim light, Roberto's living voice joined his recorded one. He didn't just want to stop us. He wanted to punish Emily. Make her death a message to anyone else who might defy him. The multiple betrayals unfolded like a Greek tragedy. Richard had known about their escape plan all along, tipped off by the network of spies he'd planted throughout their lives. The garage mechanic who'd sabotaged their brakes. The phone operator who'd monitored Emily's calls. The bank teller who'd reported her withdrawals. But the deepest betrayal, Mildred confessed, her voice barely a whisper, was mine. I told Richard about the pregnancy, thinking I could save Roberto. Instead, I signed Emily's death warrant. Sarah produced her mother's final letter, found in the evidence box. Henry had preserved. My dearest Henry, if you're reading this, Richard has discovered the truth, not just about our baby, but about his own secret. He'll never let me leave now. The man I married is capable of anything to protect his lies. The accident scene, as Roberto described it, was orchestrated to look like a tragic loss of control on a rainy night, but Richard had deliberately forced their car toward the ravine, watching with cold satisfaction as it rolled, taking Emily's life and all her evidence with it. What he didn't know, Roberto continued, was that I'd already mailed copies of everything to Henry. Emily made sure the truth would survive, even if she didn't. Lauren's legal training kicked in as she reviewed the police reports. Every investigator who questioned the accident's circumstances was suddenly transferred or resigned. The medical examiner who noted suspicious injuries was discredited. Richard's influence reached everywhere. But the betrayals weren't finished. They discovered that Emily's own father had been coerced into supporting Richard's version of events, his small business mysteriously saved from bankruptcy shortly after backing the official story. The town doctor who treated Emily's injuries from Richard's accidents was paid to diagnose her with mental illness instead, Henry revealed. Even her own therapist was on Richard's payroll, feeding him information from their sessions. The price of silence had been calculated down to the penny. Bank records showed regular payments to dozens of people hush money to maintain Richard's perfect facade. Each person who knew a piece of the truth had been either bought or threatened into compliance. He built a prison of fear, Thomas explained. Everyone who might have helped Emily was trapped by their own secrets, their own vulnerabilities that Richard exploited. The most heartbreaking betrayal came from Emily's closest friend at the hospital where she volunteered. The woman had witnessed Richard's abuse firsthand but remained silent. Her daughter's college scholarship, they discovered, had been funded by a mysterious Sawyer family grant. Mom tried to fight back, Sarah said, reading from her mother's diary. She started gathering evidence of Richard's fertility treatments, proof that his claims about the Sawyer bloodline were lies. But she underestimated how far he'd go to keep those secrets. The web of betrayal had extended even to Emily's death. The emergency responders that night had been warned not to look too closely at the accident scene. The newspaper editor who questioned the circumstances found himself facing fabricated scandal allegations. Richard didn't just kill Emily, Roberto concluded. He erased her, replaced her real story with his own version, made everyone complicit in his lies. The truth's weight settled over them like ash. They had all played parts in maintaining Richard's facade, Ethan and Lauren, by accepting his version of their mother, Mildred through her forced betrayal, the town through its collective silence. The real tragedy, Henry said softly, wasn't just Emily's death. It was how completely Richard destroyed the truth. How thoroughly he corrupted everyone around him with fear and guilt. As they sat in the growing darkness, surrounded by evidence of decades of manipulation and betrayal, they realized the truth had cost more than just Emily's life. It had poisoned an entire community, turning neighbors against each other, making everyone complicit in a conspiracy of silence. The price of that silence still echoed through their lives in Ethan's inability to trust, in Lauren's crusade for justice, in Sarah's hidden existence, in the weight of guilt that had bent Mildred's spine. But now, finally, the truth was free, and with it came the terrible responsibility of deciding what to do with it. The first shock came when Henry revealed the truth about his identity. "I'm not the Henry Salazar who loved your mother," he said quietly, his hands trembling. "I'm Thomas. Henry. Henry died 3 years ago." The silence in the farmhouse was deafening. Thomas pulled out a letter, its paper worn from frequent handling. "My brother made me promise to continue the charade until all the evidence was gathered. He knew Richard's people were still watching, still protecting his lies even after his death." Sarah's face crumpled. "You mean my father died never getting to hold you," Thomas finished softly. "But he never stopped loving you, never stopped fighting to protect you. His last words were your name and Emily's." This revelation shook their understanding of everything that had happened since finding Mildred in the park. The man they'd thought was Henry had been his twin all along, carrying out his brother's final plan to expose the truth. Then came Emily's final letter, discovered hidden in the farmhouse walls. Its contents were explosive, not just detailing Richard's crimes, but revealing an even darker secret. Richard had arranged other accidents before Emily's. 3 other women who had discovered his fertility secret had died in suspicious circumstances over the years. Your father wasn't just a controlling husband, Roberto explained, producing old newspaper clippings. He was a serial killer, eliminating anyone who threatened to expose his lies. Emily discovered this in her final weeks. It's why she was so desperate to escape. Lauren's hands shook as she read through the evidence. These women, all ruled accidental deaths, all connected to fertility clinics Richard had used, all possessing proof that could have destroyed him. The next shock came from an unexpected source. Patricia produced a DNA test result. She wasn't Roberto's daughter at all. She was Richard's child, conceived during a brief affair with her mother. Richard had known but used this information to further control Mildred's family. He had children, Ethan realized, just not with his wives. He created this elaborate lie about infertility to hide his affairs, his other families. An old recording emerged, captured by Henry before his death. On it, Richard confessed to multiple murders, believing he was speaking to a co-conspirator. His cold calculation as he described orchestrating Emily's death sent chills through everyone who heard it. But the biggest surprise awaited in Emily's diary. The final entry revealed that she had been carrying twins when she died. Sarah had a twin brother separated at birth and adopted by another family. The search for this lost sibling would open yet another chapter in their family's twisted history. Mildred finally shared her own shocking truth. She had been in love with Henry herself, long before he met Emily. Her betrayal wasn't just about protecting Roberto, it had been fueled by decades of hidden jealousy and unrequited love. I loved him since we were children, she confessed, tears streaming down her face. Watching him fall in love with Emily, it broke something in me. When Richard threatened Roberto, part of me wanted to believe I was choosing my son. But I was also punishing Emily for having what I couldn't. The evidence box contained one final surprise, a series of letters between Emily and Henry that had never been delivered. In them they had planned not just their escape, but a way to expose Richard's crimes. They had been gathering evidence for months, building a case that would have destroyed him. They weren't just running away, Thomas explained. They were planning to bring him down, to free everyone from his web of lies. Emily died a hero, fighting not just for her love, but for justice. Roberto revealed that he had maintained contact with Henry over the years through a complex system of coded messages in newspaper personal ads. This explained how they had coordinated their decades-long plan to gather evidence. Every Sunday for 30 years, Roberto said, spreading out old newspapers, we communicated right under Richard's nose. He was so focused on grand conspiracies, he missed the simple truth in front of him. The final piece fell into place when Sarah produced a key to a storage unit Henry had maintained. Inside, they found decades of evidence, not just about Emily's death, but about every crime Richard had committed, every life he had destroyed, every secret he had buried. My father spent his life building this case, Sarah said. He knew that exposing one lie wouldn't be enough. The whole truth had to come out, all at once, so completely that no one could bury it again. As they processed these revelations, they realized their task had grown far beyond exposing one man's crimes. They were uncovering a decades-long conspiracy that had touched countless lives, created multiple victims, and left a legacy of pain that would take generations to heal. The truth, it seemed, was far more complex and devastating than any of them had imagined, and they were just beginning to understand the real cost of bringing it to light. 1 year after the revelations at the farmhouse, the old Sawyer mansion was transformed into a shelter for victims of domestic violence. The Emily Matthews Foundation, funded by the dismantled Sawyer fortune, had become a beacon of hope for those trapped in situations like Emily's. Lauren stood at the podium during the opening ceremony, her voice strong despite the emotion. My mother died fighting for truth and justice. Today we honor her legacy, not by preserving the Sawyer name, but by helping others find their voice. The truth had indeed cost them everything and given them something far more valuable in return. The Sawyer business empire had crumbled under the weight of Richard's exposed crimes. Ethan had voluntarily stepped down as CEO, choosing instead to manage the foundation's resources. Sarah, no longer hiding, had become the foundation's public face. Her story, the secret child of Emily and Henry's love, resonated with people worldwide. We're not just helping victims escape, she would say. We're helping them reclaim their stories. Mildred found her redemption in unexpected ways. She became the shelter's resident grandmother figure, her experience helping others understand the complex choices abuse victims face. Her confession about her love for Henry and jealousy of Emily had freed her from decades of guilt. Sometimes, she told the women at the shelter, we make terrible choices for complicated reasons. The path to forgiveness starts with honesty, especially with ourselves. The search for Sarah's twin brother led them to Michael Chen, a successful architect in Seattle. His adoption records had been sealed, but Richard's death removed the last barriers to the truth. The reunion of the twins brought healing none of them had expected. I always felt something was missing, Michael admitted during their first meeting. Like there was another half of my story waiting to be told. Patricia's discovery about her true parentage led to more revelations. Other secret children of Richard Sawyer emerged, each carrying pieces of a larger story. Rather than reject them, the family embraced these new members, understanding that healing comes through acceptance, not denial. Roberto, finally free from hiding, dedicated himself to investigating cold cases similar to Emily's. His work helped expose other powerful men who had buried their crimes behind wealth and influence. Emily's story, he said, was never just about one family. It was about breaking the cycle of power and silence. The farmhouse became a memorial of sorts. They restored it not to its former glory, but to serve as a reminder. The walls that had witnessed Emily and Henry's love now displayed their letters, photos, and evidence not just of tragedy, but of tremendous courage. Thomas, carrying his brother's final wishes, established a scholarship fund for children of domestic violence survivors. Henry believed education was power, he explained. It's what he and Emily bonded over: first the dream of learning, growing, becoming more than their circumstances. The most profound change came in how they defined family. The Sawyer name, once representing power and prestige, now stood for something entirely different. They were bound not by blood or secrets, but by their commitment to truth and justice. Ethan and Lauren, once distant siblings, grew closer through their shared mission. Mom would be proud, Lauren said one evening, watching families find refuge in what was once their childhood prison. Not because we exposed the truth, but because we're using it to help others. The media attention eventually faded. The scandalous headlines about Richard Sawyer's crimes became yesterday's news, but the impact of their choices continued to ripple outward, touching lives they would never know. One autumn evening, exactly like the night Ethan had given his jacket to Mildred, they gathered at Emily's grave. Sarah placed fresh flowers, while Michael added a book of poetry, the same kind their father had once shared with their mother. I found my way home, Mum, Sarah whispered, touching the headstone. We all did, and we're helping others find their way too. Mildred, supported by Patricia, placed her own tribute, the jacket Ethan had given her that fateful night, now framed along with Emily's last letter. Love doesn't die with secrets, she quoted softly. It waits in the truth, patient as stars, until brave hearts find their way home. As they stood together, the children of secrets and lies transformed by truth, the victims turned survivors, the broken made whole through honesty and purpose. They understood finally what Emily had fought and died for. Not just for love, but for the right to live truth fully and completely. The Sawyer legacy was indeed destroyed, But from its ashes arose something far more valuable, a testament to the power of truth, the strength of forgiveness, and the enduring impact of one woman's courage to love despite all costs. The sun set over the cemetery, casting long shadows much like the night this story began. But now, instead of secrets and shame, these shadows held promise of healing, of purpose, of lives transformed by the simple, devastating power of truth. Emily Matthews Sawyer's true legacy lived on, not in name or fortune, but in the countless lives touched by her children's determination to honor her final wish that love and truth would triumph over power and lies, no matter the cost, no matter how long it took. And somewhere, perhaps, Emily and Henry were finally at peace, their love story complete not in its tragic ending, but in the healing it ultimately brought to so many others. The end was really just another beginning. In life, we often carry burdens too heavy to name, secrets that bend our spines, lies that poison our hearts, and regrets that haunt our nights. Like Mildred, we make impossible choices thinking we're protecting those we love, only to discover that our silence becomes the heaviest betrayal. Emily and Henry's story reminds us that true love isn't about grand gestures or perfect moments. It's about the courage to stand against the darkness, even when standing means falling. It's about the strength to choose truth over comfort, justice over safety, and hope over fear. To those who've ever felt trapped by circumstances, who've watched helplessly as power crushed innocence, who've carried the weight of what if through sleepless nights your pain is seen. Your struggle matters. Your truth, however long buried, deserves to be heard. For every mother who's sacrificed her happiness for her children's safety, for every friend who's lived with the agony of forced betrayal, for every child who's grown up in the shadow of unspoken truths, you are not alone. Like Emily, your love leaves ripples that touch lives far beyond your own. The greatest tragedy isn't in dying for what we believe in, it's in living without believing in anything at all. Emily died protecting the truth that would eventually set countless others free. Her story teaches us that our darkest moments can become someone else's light, our deepest wounds can become bridges to healing. To those burdened by guilt like Mildred, remember, redemption doesn't erase the past, but it can transform the future. Your mistakes don't define you, your courage to face them does. It's never too late to choose truth, to stand for justice, to become the person you were meant to be. And to the children of silence, like Ethan and Lauren, your inheritance isn't in the name you carry or the lies you've been told. It's in your capacity to break the cycles that broke those before you, to turn wounds into wisdom and pain into purpose. Remember Emily's final words: love doesn't die with secrets. It waits in the truth, patient as stars, until brave hearts find their way home. Your heart knows the way. Trust it. Follow it. Let it lead you home. Because in the end, it's not the power we hold, but the truth we speak that changes lives. It's not the facades we maintain, but the walls we dare to break that set us free. And it's not the silence we keep, but the stories we brave to tell that heal not just ourselves, but generations to come. Your truth matters. Your story matters. Your courage to break the silence matters. Like Emily's love for Henry, like Mildred's path to redemption, like the healing found by all who dared to face the truth, your journey to authenticity might cost you everything, but what it gives in return is worth more than all you could lose. Be brave. Speak up. Let your truth light the way home. For somewhere in the stars above, Emily is smiling, knowing that her sacrifice wasn't in vain, that love truly is stronger than fear, and that truth, no matter how long buried, will always find its way to the light. This isn't just a story, it's a calling. To love fiercely, live truthfully, and leave a legacy not of power, but of courage. What will your truth set free? If this story touched your heart, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. Your support means the world to us. Share with loved ones who need to hear this message of hope and healing. Leave a comment below about how Emily's story moved you. Your words inspire us to bring more powerful stories of love, truth, and redemption. Together, let's spread stories that matter.